1943. The world is at war, and on the docks of Philadelphia, witnesses claim to see something impossible. A United States Navy destroyer, the USS Eldridge, suddenly vanishes inside a glowing green fog, only to reappear miles away in an instant. This event would become known as the Philadelphia Experiment, one of the most enduring and fascinating mysteries of the 20th century. But did it really happen? Was a naval ship actually teleported through space and time? Or is this a case of a single, misunderstood story spiraling into an elaborate legend? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on this incredible tale. We'll dive into declassified documents, trace the real history of the ship involved, and uncover how a few strange letters from one man created a myth that has captivated the world for decades. Get ready, because the truth behind the vanishing ship is even more fascinating than the fiction. The early 1940s were a time of unprecedented technological advancement, driven by the desperation of global conflict. Every major power was locked in a frantic race to develop game-changing technology. When we're talking about the dawn of radar, the birth of the nuclear age, and, crucially for our story, the development of magnetic stealth systems. The primary goal of these systems wasn't to make ships invisible to the eye, but to protect them from a deadly and unseen enemy: German magnetic mines. These mines were designed to detonate when they detected the large metal hull of a ship passing overhead. The U.S. Navy's Philadelphia Naval Shipyard was a bustling hub of this innovation. It was a giant laboratory where engineers and scientists worked around the clock. One of their key projects involved testing powerful electromagnetic fields to essentially demagnetize ships, making them invisible to these German mines. This process was real, it was scientific, and it was vital to the war effort. This scientific seed, this kernel of truth about manipulating electromagnetic fields, is where the wild legend of the Philadelphia Experiment would eventually take root and grow into something far more fantastical. Let's talk about the ship at the heart of this mystery, the USS Eldridge, designation DE-173. It was a real vessel, a Cannon-class destroyer escort, and its history is well documented. The Eldridge was launched in July of 1943 and commissioned a month later. Its official service records are detailed and clear. It spent its career performing vital, but frankly routine duties, escorting convoys across the treacherous Atlantic, protecting Allied transport routes from U-boat attacks, and making standard port stops. At no point do its official logs or the testimonies of its crew mention anything about disappearing, teleporting, or being surrounded by a mysterious green fog. Every crew roster, every captain's logbook confirms its location and activities. It was never part of any secret invisibility project. The men who served on the Eldridge were ordinary sailors doing an extraordinary job to win the war. Yet, years after its mundane but honorable service, this completely normal ship would be thrust into the center of one of history's most extraordinary and unbelievable claims. Its real story was about to be overwritten by a myth. The myth truly begins, not in 1943, but over a decade later, in 1950. A man named Carl Allen, who often used the pseudonym Carlos Allende, began sending a series of very strange letters to an astronomer and popular author named Maurice K. Jessup. Jessup had recently published a book called The Case for the UFO, and Allen clearly thought he was a receptive audience for a wild story. In these letters, Allen claimed he had been a merchant mariner in 1943 and had personally witnessed the USS Eldridge vanish from the Philadelphia docks, enveloped in that now infamous eerie green mist. He didn't stop at simple invisibility. His letters were filled with bizarre, horrifying details. He spoke of successful teleportation, but with terrible side effects for the crew. He described sailors becoming fused with the steel bulkheads of the ship, others going mad, and some spontaneously combusting or vanishing into thin air. It was the stuff of science fiction horror. But there was a massive problem with Allen's account. He had absolutely no evidence to back it up. No photographs, no corroborating witnesses, not a single shred of proofs, just his own fantastical letters, written more than a decade after the supposed event. Jessup, the author, was understandably intrigued but also highly skeptical. He was a researcher after all. He began to look into the claims, but found nothing. Then, things took an even stranger turn. A copy of Jessup's own book on UFOs was anonymously mailed to the Office of Naval Research. This copy was filled with handwritten annotations in its margins, notes that expanded on Allen's teleportation story with even more pseudo-scientific jargon. The handwriting appeared to be from at least 3 different individuals, all seemingly corresponding with each other. The Navy, believing the notes might have been written by Allen himself, took a look, but they weren't investigating a teleporting ship. Their primary interest was in assessing the mental state of the writer and whether he might pose any kind of security risk. After their brief review, the Office of Naval Research made its position clear. In 1957, they officially stated that no invisibility experiment of the kind described had ever taken place. The Vero edition, as the annotated book became known, was dismissed. To put the final nail in the coffin, naval records confirmed that at the supposed time of the Philadelphia event, the USS Eldridge wasn't even in Philadelphia. It was hundreds of miles away, on a shakedown cruise in the Bahamas. So, if the Navy denied it and the ship's logs disprove it, how did this story not only survive, but explode in popularity? The answer lies in the cultural atmosphere of the Cold War. This was an era of intense public fascination with fringe science, UFOs, and government secrets. Albert Einstein's search for a unified field theory, a single set of equations that could explain all the forces of nature, had captured the public imagination. Amateur theorists, with little to no scientific background, latched onto this complex concept. They incorrectly connected Einstein's theoretical physics to the Philadelphia story, creating a new narrative. They suggested that the Navy had secretly cracked the unified field theory, discovering how to manipulate the fabric of space-time itself to bend light and make a ship invisible. But no such project ever existed. What did exist was a very real, very unmysterious program called Project Dygosing. This was the process we mentioned earlier, where large electrical cables were wrapped around a ship's hull. When a powerful current was sent through them, it temporarily neutralized the ship's magnetic signature to fool magnetic minds. Eyewitnesses on the docks might have seen this degaussing process in action. It could create sparks, strange electrical glows, and a shimmering heat haze effect in the air around the vessel. It's easy to see how untrained observers, hearing whispers of secret wartime projects, could let their imaginations run wild and interpret this strange sight as invisibility. Rumors began to spread, and the legend took on a life of its own. By the 1980s, the Philadelphia experiment was no longer just a fringe theory in obscure books. It had become a full-blown pop culture phenomenon. A major motion picture was released, followed by novels, documentaries, and countless TV shows, each adding new, more dramatic layers to the myth. The story was now firmly entrenched in the public consciousness as a tale of teleportation, disastrous human experiments, and a massive government cover-up. The line between the factual scientific process of dygaussing and the fictional tale of a teleporting ship had completely blurred. In a way, the truth had vanished, much like the ship in the legend. The story was just too good, too exciting, to let the boring facts get in the way. So, where does that leave us today? After decades of investigation by historians, physicists, and naval experts, not a single piece of credible evidence has ever been found to support the claim that the USS Eldridge or any other ship was made invisible or teleported. Every verifiable fact points in the opposite direction. Yet, the myth of the Philadelphia experiment endures. And the reason for that is deeply human. It speaks to our fascination with the unknown, our suspicion of authority, and our deep-seated hope that just maybe, behind the curtain of our reality, the impossible was once real. The truth of the Philadelphia experiment is simpler, but in its own way, just as compelling. It's a story not of physics, but of psychology. It's a story about how a real wartime technology, witnessed by a few and misunderstood by many, could be twisted by one man's imagination and amplified by a culture hungry for mystery. It wasn't about invisibility, it was about the power of imagination and the spread of misinformation. And perhaps that's what truly keeps history alive and interesting. Not the myths we invent, but the questions we never stop asking and the truths we uncover along the way. If you love exploring real stories that sound almost impossible, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We're always digging into history's greatest mysteries. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay curious.